Okay, so week 15, in preparation for doing some statistics, this week's workshop is all about importing and exporting data. Now this is admittedly quite a fiddly task, and it's one that generally causes people a lot of problems. So we're going to take you through this very carefully and in some of the problems that people come into. So let's start from the beginning with something that's not going to work. I want to read in the file called air quality.txt. So there it is. Okay, header equals true, we'll talk about later. Of course, it can't find the file, and that's because I haven't even downloaded the file. And the point is that it looks for the file in your working directory. And if you click on so files here, this should go to where you've set to your working directory, and in here I don't have any data files, I just have some of the script files. So we need to remember that set our working directory, which remember we can do either by going to tools, set working directory, choose directory, or by navigating in this interface and then selecting more, set as working directory. So we need to get the files we need from Moodle. That's where the files that we're using today are stored. So I go to lab 100, and the data is down here, and the file that I'm using now is called airquality.txt. So if I click on that, now it's downloaded, but that's still no good because it will now be in the wrong place. So if I do save as, and now I need to carefully put it in the same place as my working directory. So there it is, it's now in the same place as my working directory, and I can see if I just refresh the view here, it should hopefully appear. So this is just okay, so that's taking a long time, but anyway, so it is actually there, and that should pop up in a second. So now if I run this command again, it is actually doing something. Okay, and that's just read it into our, it's not actually stored it as anything, it's just read it in. And in fact we can go back there and we can see that it has appeared in that file. So that's no good. We need to store it in a variable. So let's have a variable called airqual, and now I have the data stored in there. So I can do whatever I like with it. I can I can look at, say, particular entries of it. So say look at the first row. There's the first row. One useful thing that you can do with a big file that you've read in is the function called head, and that just takes the first 5 or 6 rows of the file, just so you can glance at it and make sure that you've inputted that correctly. Okay, so this is a .txt file, and we read those in using read.table. Header equals true we use because this does actually have a header. So in other words, the first row of the file, it corresponds to variable names rather than being the first instance of the variable. So that's the key thing to remember there. So if I set here header equals false, read that in, now actually it says it's coming with an error. It doesn't understand the top line without that being a header. So header equals true, and that is in fact what it will do by default. So if we deleted that, then it will still read that in successfully. So that's read.table. Now it may be that I want to make some amendments to this particular file for whatever reason. So for example, let's look at the first column, and let's say I wanted to add 1 to the first column, and in fact I want to store that back into the original place. So airqual 1 becomes airqual 1 plus 1. Okay, should have typed that up there, of course, to keep it on record. So I'm taking the first column of airqual and I'm replacing it with airqual 1 plus 1. So now my airqual is different, and I might want to save it, and to do that I use a function called write.table. Write.table, and I put in the name of the variable, which is airqual, And the name of the file that I'm going to save it to, well, let's call it air quality p1 for +1.txt. And if I do that, then you can see on the right hand panel here, it's generated a new file called air quality p1.txt. Okay, so I can also do the same thing with CSV files. So let's get this w15 CSV file. Again, I open it. It's opened in Excel. But let me save this again in my working directory, lab. So we'll save it in lab, w15. So you might get an error message like this. You just say yes, and there we go. And even when you close it, it's going to say, do you want to save the changes? And you've done that, so that's fine. So for CSV files, you can see that's appeared now. It's a different command. It's read.csv instead of read.table. So now we're reading in w100.csv. And there it is. Again, we need to save that to a variable rather than just running it. So that saved those footsie values into the thing called footsie. And again, I could write it back using write.csv. So now this is all very logical, really. So footsie, and I'll call a new file. Well, this is actually, I've made no modifications. This is going to be exactly the same as the old one. So let's just call it w100 copy.csv. So there it is, and I've written that back as a new file. Now this is going to be a really useful technique for dealing with big data. You don't want to be writing something like this here out by hand. That's going to be extremely tedious, and you're going to make mistakes. So this is the technique that we use to import and export .txt files and to import and export .csv files. And those are the ones that we're going to be using throughout the rest of Lab 100 and throughout the rest of your degree. Remember, we'll be using R a lot in more advanced statistics modules, and these are the techniques that you'll need for reading and writing data.